Okay, folks, good morning. Again, my apologies for the postponed class from last night. This is a recording and I'm doing it on my own with no participants, so it may go a little quicker. In the previous, we're in Perek Ches of the second Maamer in Ayin Beis, and we're in Perek Ches, chapter 8. So, in the previous Perek, in the previous Prokim, we discussed the whole concept of the world of Atzilus. Now, the world of Atzilus is called Gilui HaHelem, the revelation of what was hidden Kamus Imadi, which was what was hidden with me, so to speak, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it is not a world which is a created world in the same way that the world of Bria is created. There's no hischadshus in the world of Atzilus. The world of Atzilus is not a new thing. It's not yesh mi ayin, which is the inyan of hischadshus, a complete novelty. It's not yesh mi ayin, but rather it's the inyan of gilui hahelem, revealing that which was previously in a state of helem, in a state of concealment. Nevertheless, we said, even the world of Atzilus, even though it's not yesh mi ayin, and it's only gilui hahelem, nevertheless, it is not it is ba'en aroch to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's ba'en aroch. Ba'en aroch meaning that there's no incomparable to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, you cannot say that the world of Atzilus and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are on the same level. Chas v'sholom to say such a thing. Now, not only is it ba'en aroch to the ma'atzil, to the emanator, but it's more ba'en aroch to the emanator than even the world of Asiya is to the world of Atzilus. Even though the world of Asiya is yesh mi ayin, and not only is it yesh mi ayin, but it's yesh mamish. It is actually a physical yesh, the world of Asiya, and therefore it's ba'en aroch to the world of Atzilus, which is called a ruchnius and kula oyer. Alpha became the Ein Aroch of Asiya to Atzilus is not even comparable to the Ein Aroch of Atzilus to the Ma'atzil, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And the reason for this is because as far as the Olam HaAsiya is concerned, it's only the Tachton of the Elyon. In other words, the Elyon is Olam HaAtzilus, and if you go down the scale and say Hishtoshlu, it's like a long chain. The end of the chain is Olam HaAsiya, and therefore it's, even though they ba'en aroch one to the other, it's a very, very long way down from the world of Atzilus to the world of Asiya. Nevertheless, they are in some senses in the same plane of existence. In a sense, they're in the same plane, because the Tachton was originally kalul in the Elyon. Everything that you have in the world of Asiya was in some way or another included already in the world of Atzilus. Not Kamoshu, not as it is now in the world of Asiya, but nevertheless, it was included within it. Whereas when we say that it's Ein Aroch of Atzilus to the Ein Aroch of Atzilus to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was that it was not Kol v'Makoiro. You cannot say the world of Atzilus was Niskalel in Atzmus, Afil in Or Ein Sof. And therefore we say Ein Aroch Ba'olam Hazeh, and that is true of all of the worlds. They ba'en aroch, obviously, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, I paused the recording for a minute and I forgot where I was up to because I just went on So now I have to go back again. I'm not sure where I got up to when I actually paused it. So I'm just going to start the beginning of the chapter again, and I'll say it very, sort of briefly. So the chapter begins again. Since the world of Atzilus is the inyan of Vo'otzalti min haruach asher alecha, this is talking about the Shivim Zakenim, when the ruach of Moshe Rabbeinu was put from HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts the ruach upon Moshe onto the Shivim Zakenim. Vo'otzalti min haruach asher alecha v'nosati aleihem, I'll put it upon them. That's called Gilui HaHelem. What was there in Moshe Rabbeinu was now placed upon the Zakenim, and it wasn't a Davar Chadash, it wasn't an inyan V'Ischatshus. It's not the concept of ischatshus. The inyan Atzilus, therefore, is not ischatshus. It's not yesh mi'ayin. It's not a nivra. It's a ma'atzil. It's the world of Atzilus from the ma'atzil, and therefore it's emanated, not created. It's not a created world, and therefore it's not the inyan of ischatshus. As is written by the Maareches. The Maareches is, there are some who say that they don't, it's anonymous. It was the Sefer Maareches Elokus, was written anonymously. It's an early Kabbalah Sefer, and brings a lot of the philosophy of behind the ideas in Kabbalah, as well as some of the technical things, but it's more on the philosophical side. And the Maareches, some others say that the Maareches was someone named Reb Peretz HaKohen. Reb Peretz HaKohen, and I forget from which city. I think somewhere in France. If I'm not mistaken. In any event, so he explains. The Maareches explains as follows: B'inyan Atzilus. As regards Atzilus, he says as follows: Shalom ischadesh davar b'ma'atzil v'ne'etzal. There's no chidush of the ne'etzal from the ma'atzil. There's no chidush there. There's no chidush involved. Just like the inyan vo'otzalti is not a chidush, it's a gilui hahelem. So too, the world of Atzilus is gilui hahelem. Rakshin is gale koach hakamus, something that was previously hidden. Kamus v'chasun is hidden and sealed away, right? Hidden away and sealed away, and was revealed now mikoich halapoil, from potential to actuals. When the state of potential, now it's actualized. So the world of Atzilus was not created; it was an actualization of something that was already there. So how are both of these things possible? How is it possible that you can have the inyan of that the world of Atzilus is ba'en aroch, as we said previously in the previous chapter? How can you say it's ba'en aroch to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and at the same time it's not a davar chadash? Because l'chayra, if it is ba'en aroch, you would assume that it would be a davar chadash, it would be something new. If it's a davar chadash, then it's not. Then it will be ba'en aroch. So how can you have both of these two things together? They seem to be contradictory. On the one hand, Atzilus is ba'en aroch to the ma'atzil. On the other hand, it's not a davar chadash. How can you have both of these two things together? Now, as I'm not sure if I mentioned this before I stopped the recording. This concept doesn't appear sort of intuitively because of the kitzur that runs in between them. The kitzur was not previously originally when the Maamorim were said, they were not written or said with the beginnings and ends of the Maamorim, and they weren't divided into chapters. It was a hemshech, just one hemshech of inyonim. So that's why you don't necessarily relate it to what he said above. But that's what he means over here. He's talking about the inyan of Ein Aroch. It's before the Kitzur, what he mentioned before the Kitzur. In any event, how can you have both of them together, the inyan of Ein Aroch, and yet it's not an inyan of Yitzchakshus? But the inyan, he's going to explain the concept as follows. The inyan Yadua, as is known, the Atzilus hu memutza bein Or Ein Sof HaMa'atzil el HaNivroim. That the world of Atzilus is a memutza, an in between madrega. In other words, on the one hand, you have the inyan of the Ma'atzil. On the other hand, you have the inyan of Nivroim. And what connects the two of them is Olam Atzilus. Olam Atzilus is the connector between these two inyonim. And just like any connector, it has to have an interface, so to speak, with the lower madrega and an interface with the higher madrega. So too, as we'll see, the world of Atzilus has both of these concepts. It has an interface with that which, with the Or Ein Sof, and has an interface with the inyan of Yesh Ayin, with the inyan of the Nivroim. The Nivroim, Nivra, from the Loshan Yesh Ayin, as the Ramban points out, at the beginning of Breishis, that the inyan of Breishis is that creation has to do with the inyan of Yesh Ayin. The Ramban points that out at the beginning of Breishis. Okay. The same concept is explained in Kuf Samach Aleph, that Prokim later on in Chelik Aleph. V'yadua, and as he explains, the kol memutza tachlius kol mishnei madregas. Every memutza has to have two madregas in it, both madregas in it. In other words, the madrega of the tachton and the madrega of the elyon. It has to have something of the elyon and something of the tachton in order to be able to connect the two things. What are these two inyonim that Atzilus has of the elyon and the tachton? The inyan of oir is the inyan of elyon, and the kalim are the inyan of tachton. V'im kain, yesh ba'atzilus mechinas or ein sof ha'ma'atzil, and therefore in the world of Atzilus you have an aspect of the ma'atzil. What's the aspect of the ma'atzil that you have? It's the inyan of or ein sof. I'll explain that in a minute. V'gam mechinas ha'nivroim, and you also have in Atzilus the inyan of nivroim. Okay, now notice that he says here the or Ein Sof. He doesn't say the Ein Sof or Atzmuso Mahusoi, the essence of Hashem. Olam Atzilus is, after all, created is not the right word. Olam Atzilus is emanated after the Tzimtzum. It comes after the Tzimtzum. So therefore, there's no way to say that Olam Atzilus is Ma'atzil. It's Ne'etzal min Ma'atzil. It's emanated from the emanator, but it is not the emanator. It comes from the Or Ein Sof in which the Tzimtzum took place. He'll explain this shortly when he starts to explain the inyan of the Kav, the line of light that's attached to the Or Ein Sof from which Atzilus ultimately, the Or of Atzilus comes. But he uses very conspicuously and very precisely uses the lotion or Ein Sof and not Ein Sof. You see in many other Svarim, amongst the Mekubolim, they don't make that distinction that clearly, like in Ramchal and various other places. He does not make that distinction so clearly. Other places as well. In any event, here it's clear that we're talking about the Or Ein Sof. Bechinas Or Ein Sof Ma'atzil, v'gam bechinas Nivroim. So Atzilus has both of these aspects in it. What are these two aspects that there are in the world of Atzilus? These are the Oiros on the one hand. The Oiros relate to the Ma'atzil, to the Or Ein Sof, and therefore the Oiros are going to be bechinas Bli Gvul. The Oiros are unlimited. They don't have the limitations of the Olam HaTachtonim, the lower worlds. On the other hand, you still have in the world of Atzilus, you still have the inyan of Kalim, right? You have the inyan of a Kli. What's the inyan of a Kli? The inyan of a Kli is that it contains something. A Kli, a vessel, contains something. So the Kalim of the spheres of the world of Atzilus contain. What do they contain? They contain an Or Pnimi. They contain the Or that is closed within them. And that's what the Kalim do. They separate the Or HaPnimi from the Or HaMakif. There's Or HaMakif in Olam Atzilus as well, but it's divided from the Or Pnimi by the Kalim. The Or Pnimi is the Or in the Kalim, and the Or Makif envelops everything. Okay, so this is Bechinas Oris and Kalim of Atzilus. Dehine Kalim of Atzilus, Haim Bechinas Gvul. The Kalim of Atzilus are the aspect of Gvul. Bechinas Gvul, and not Mamish Gvul, not Gvul like it is in Olam HaBriya and downwards, but nevertheless a Bechina of Gvul. It's an aspect of Gvul. As Avodas HaKodesh is another early Kabbalah Sefer, Rabbi Meir Ibn Kabai, famous Mekubal, and also more on the sort of philosophical side of Kabbalah than, for example, Kisva Arizal. He preceded the Arizal by quite a bit. Rabbi Ibn Gabai in Avodas HaKodesh, so he says as follows: She'im Taimar. If you're going to say She'im Taimar, if you're going to say She'esh Lo Koach B'Bilti Bal Gvul, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a koach of Bilti Bal Gvul, he has the koach of infinity. But he does not have the koach of the finite. You're detracting from his completeness. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to have both in Yonim. He has to. If we want to say that he's B'Shleimus, we have to say that he has the inyan of infinite, and he has power in the finite as well. He has the power of the infinite, he has the power of the finite. Infinite and finite are not who he is. He's not infinite, he's not finite, right? He is who he is. But he has the koyach of infinity and the koyach of finitude. And if you say that he's missing one of them, the koyach of finitude, you're detracting from his wholeness. Because there were earlier Makubalim that wanted to argue that you can't say that there is a concept of limitation within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because they understood that the limitation would be, they didn't know about the whole concept of the Tzimtzum. So therefore, they assume that the limitation, if limitation comes out to be Begilui later on, it comes out in the revelation later on, then it must be within. And therefore, you would say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in some way or another limited, and they couldn't have that. You couldn't say that, obviously. And therefore, they wanted to say that he's only the in and of Ein Sof, or Ein Sof, or infinity, and the finitude comes from elsewhere. But in other words, from the Shtalshlus or whatever. Says Rabbi Meir Ibn Gabai, that's not the case. You have to say that the koyach of finitude and the koyach of infinity both are aspects of Shleimusa, his complete being. And then he goes on to say, and the gvul, the limitations that come out of the Orein Sof at first, the first limitations that come out are the Indian of the spheroids. Later on, other limitations come out as well. But the spheroids are an Indian limitation. Why the spheroids are an Indian limitation? Because Avalpi that the or in there might be bli gvul, but the kalim are bechidus gvul, right? And the Oris and Kalim work together to make the spheroids, and therefore there's an inyan of Gvul even in Olam HaAtzilus. He's going to explain further. V'hakavona ala Kalim da Atzilus. This inyan of Gvul that there is in the world of Atzilus is the Kalim of Atzilus. Shehem b'chinas Gvul. Hainu shehem begeder umahuz b'chinas Chochma v'Chesed. They have the geder, the limitation, the definition, let's call it, and the quality of Chochmah, of Chesed, of Bina, of Gvura, and so on and so forth. They have Gedorim, they have certain limitations. This is Chochmah, and it's not Bina. This is Bina, not Chochmah, and not Gvura, and so on and so forth. Each Sphira has its character, its quality, and therefore its limitation. It's this particular bucket and not that one, so to speak. The Ike Metzius Bechinas Chochma v'Chesed who bekalim dafka, that the Metzius of Chochma, that you can say this is Chochma, or this is Chesed, or this is Bina, or that's Gvura, etc. That's defining it by the Kalim thereof, and not so much by the Oir. Now you remember we spoke about before that the Ramak understood that the Oiris were all the same Oiros, it's all the same Or, and the Kalim were what made the or into that particular quality. So if you're talking about chesed, if the same or in chesed was the same or in gvura, only the kli of chesed made it into chesed, and the kli of gvura made it into gvura. So it seems like to a certain extent, we have to say that to a certain extent, mitzad, this particular inyan, the Ramak was in fact correct. That it is the kli that gives the Sphira its character. Nevertheless, the Arizal would explain that why is the or of Chesed dafka in Chesed, so that it can be revealed as Chesed, because there's epis at siyur in the or, there's something that's shaykh in the or that's shaykh to the kli of chesed dafka, and not to the kli of gvura. Ad kedei kach, and vice versa, of course. Something in the or of gvura that you don't have in the kli of chesed. Something in the or of gvura that goes into the kli of gvura and not into the kli of chesed. And that's the explanation of why you have something that's called pele. It's a pele, something wondrous and unusual. You have something in a concept in Kabbalah which is called achlifu duchtaihu, when the oiros and the kalim change their positions. So in other words, sometimes you'll have an or of chesed which is in the dafka in a kli of gvura, or sometimes an or of gvura which is in a kli of chesed. But that's an unusual situation which is called achlifu duchtayu, and that happens because of the pnimius or. The pnimius or is not mugbal in one way or another, but the chitzonius or of chesed is dafka shaykh to the kli of chesed, and the chitzonius or of gvura is shaykh dafka to the or of gvura. In any event, we just explained the ikmatzias of chokhmah and chesed is in the kalim of that particular sphere. There's also a limitation in how much they mispashit. Ad po v'tulo, right? Up until here and no further. As HaKadosh Baruch Hu said at the beginning of creation, that he's called Shin Dalad Yud, Kel Shin Dalad Yud. Why Shin Dalad Yud? She'omar lo'olamo dai. He said enough. Ad po, right? You're not going any further. We make a rakia and that's it. We're not. You can't go any further. So that's the in of Hagbola bis pashtu shalayim. They can't spread out forever. Afal pi that the or might be an or biligvul, but because of the kli, there's a limitation to these pashtus of that particular or. And as it's brought in, there's actually a sefer Kabbalah called the Shir Koima, which discusses the stature, so to speak, of ruchnius in the Olamis. I'm saying it as ruchnius in the Olamis because initially, the way it seems to be portrayed is that this is the size, so to speak, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's obviously not intended that way. Al-Kupanim, to our minds, is certainly not intended that way. And therefore, when it talks about the Shir Koima, it's not talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, but it's talking about the Hispashtus HaOr. In any event, the Hispashtus HaOr is called the Shir Koima of the Yotzer Bereishis, of the one who created the world. And that is, how big is it? Reish Lamed Vav Alofim Revavos Parsois. There's 236,000 100,000, I don't know how you would call it, 236 billion parsois. Yeah, Kaminyan Rav Chesed, as in the gematria of not Rav Chesed, Rav Koyach. Rav Koyach is gematria Reish Lamed Vav, Rav Koyach. Right? So they figure out from that posuk, Rav Koyach, that there are 236 Alofim Ravavos parsois. In any event, whatever it is, it's a limitation of one sort or another, even though it might be infinite. So the same thing you have, just by the way, sort of a proof of this, is that in numbers, let's say you have whole numbers. So you can have an infinite series of whole numbers. But if you have integers, there must be, even though infinite is infinite, you have to say, like logically speaking, that since there's an infinite number of integers between 1 and 2, right, an infinite number of fractions between 1 and 2. So you would have to say that the infinite set of numbers of integers and fractions, etc., has got to be greater than the infinite series of whole numbers. Even though it's hard to talk about infinite is infinite, it wouldn't be infinite otherwise. But theoretically, we can understand that. Okay. So, how did I get onto that? I don't remember, but anyway. We could say that this limitation, this Hagbola, that this Ramar Reish Lamed Vav Pasois, etc., Reish Lamed Vav Alofim Mervavos Pasois, is Hagbola Zois Kamoshu B'Biyah. When that's already drawn down into the world of Bria, then you could say it's a mispar, it's mispar. As I mentioned before, There are shittas that it's actually talking about koima of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, which obviously doesn't make any sense. Okay? But in any event, the whole inyan of Hagbola is in the Oilemus. But what? In the world of Atzilus, there's no shiur umida adayin as yet, bispashtusan, to the degree that they can spread out further. Okay. So where are we up to? We basically said that Atzilus is a memutzaim. There's two aspects in Atzilus. One is the inyan of the Or Ein Sof in Atzilus. The other one is the inyan of the Kalim. And we're going to explain this a little bit more. As written elsewhere, the chlalus inyan hagvul, the Kalim, hu shediyeh bahem al yadam hagbola chutz la'Atzilus. The inyan of the Kalim of Atzilus is that the Kalim of Atzilus, the vessels in the world of Atzilus, bring about the inyan of Hagbola outside of Atzilus. In other words, in the world of Bria and Yetzirah and Asiya. But in Atzilus themselves, the Kalim are not limited in that same way. They're not limited in the world of Atzilus. They're only the actual limitation. There's potential limitation in the world of Atzilus, but it's not mamish limitation. Limitation mamish bepoil is only in the Olamas HaTachtoinim, from Bria on downwards. Aber Atzilus Gufa, in Atzilus itself, these kalim are not actually bebechinas gvul. So therefore, in the world of Atzilus, you don't have the inyan of gvul, but you have the potential for creating gvul, for bringing about gvul. And this is what is written in Sefer Yetzirah, I think it's in the first parak, Midasan Eser she'en lahem sof. There are 10 spheres, and each sphere is Ein Sof. As explained elsewhere, even the Kalim, when it's talking about the world of Atzilus, even the Kalim Ein lahem sof. In other words, if there's the inyan of Chesed, it's Chesed Ein Sof. In Olam Atzilus, Chesed Ein Sof. But it has the potential to be Magbil in the Olam HaTachtonim. Okay? But when they're in the world of Atzilus, they don't have that gvul, but they have a certain characteristics. They have the character of Chesed or the character of Gvura, and therefore, in this way, they sort of divided off from each other, and there is an inyan of limitation, even though it's not limitation, in the way that we would normally understand limitation. That's what he says. She'en lahem gvul k'mo she'hem b'Atzilus. They don't have actual limitation when they're in the world of Atzilus. Aval mikol makom, but nevertheless, gan k'mo she'hem b'Atzilus, even though they're still in the world of Atzilus, as they are in the world of Atzilus, hen v'chidas mitzius midas v'koichos. They have certain qualities, they have certain powers, they do certain things, so to speak. There's this particular midah, that particular koyach. There's the midah of Ava, the midah of Gvura, koyach Hayira, koyach Ava, and so on and so forth. But what's that talking about? That's talking about the Kalim Dafka. Aval Oiros, but when it comes to the Oiros in Atzilus, Einam Bechinas B'tzias Midos. You can't say that the Oiros have any particular midah. Why? Because otherwise it wouldn't be Oir. What defines a midah is the Kli. The or of it is bebechinas Ein Sof. Shari hu ha'ora ma'or Ein Sof ha'ma'atzil, because the or is a ha'ora, it's a radiance of the or Ein Sof ha'ma'atzil, and even a radiance has to have the inyan of Ein Sof. In other words, light is light. Even if it's limited by a window, let's say light coming through a window or light coming through a doorway, right, is nevertheless the other side of the doorway, the other side of the window, outside of the window, whereas the light is not limited, and as it goes through the window, into the room, even though it's mugbal by the window or by the door, wherever it shines through, nevertheless, it's still completely the inyan of oil. So this is what he's saying over here. He's not in the ghetto of midas at all. The lav ilay mikol midas ihu klal. He is not one of those midas, as it says in Tanav in Pasach Eliyahu, right? In Pasach Eliyahu, introduction to the Zohar, Tikkunei Zohar. the lav mikol in midas ihu klal. He's not any of those midas. And we get a midas klal. The or is not begetter midas. Kmokain ha or gamken and begetter midas. And just like the or is not the or itself before it goes through the window, before it goes into the kli, it's not shaykh to talk about any particular midah. So too, even if it's even when it's in the kli, it's not shaykh to talk about the bechina of midah as far as the or itself is concerned. He's going to explain. As is a well-known concept, the shorish or is ein makav. The oires come from the kav. As we'll see later, the kalim come from the tzimtzum and the reshimu. We'll discuss that a little bit later. But the oires come from the kav. Now, what's the Indian of the kav? So after the tzimtzum, first there was only or ein sof, and then there was the tzimtzum in the or ein sof, and then himshich kav echad dak mea or ein sof shaloi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mamshich, a thin line of light, so to speak, a kav dak, a thin line of light, from the or ein sof, into the halal, into the void that he had created through the tzimtzum. So the Indian of the kav is that it's a hamshocha of the or ein sof from before the tzimtzum, but it's nimshach through the tzimtzum. He'll explain that shortly. You do the shorish oiris and makav. The shorish hamshocha soy hume or ein sof shlifnei tzimtzum. The shorish of the kav is from the or ein sof before the tzimtzum. This is the lotion of the Eitz Chaim. Himshich kav dak me'or ha'elyon chulu. He drew forth a line of light, a fine line of light, me'or ha'elyon, from the supernal light from the or ein sof. And that's called the or ha'kav. The kav comes into the halal, and it says it's mis'agel, v'choyzu mis'agel. It makes a circle around the outer perimeter. I'm sorry, not the outer perimeter, the inner perimeter, but the outermost inner perimeter of the halal. And then it makes another circle within that first circle, and another circle within the second, and so on and so forth. And so it goes down, and these come to be called the igulim of Ak, the igulim of Adam Kadmon, and we'll talk about that later on. But suffice it to say that the kav coming into the halal is what forms Adam Kadmon. And even though the kav comes about by way of the tzimtzum, in other words, it's nimshach after the tzimtzum, and the tzimtzum therefore affects the kav. The chavus is atzilus hein atzilus ha'oiros va'atzilus ha'kelim. Whether you're talking about the emanation of the or of atzilus or the emanation of the kelim of atzilus, nevertheless, hakol hu ala de tzimtzum shahaya ba'orein sof baruch hu. All of it was via the tzimtzum. There's nothing that came about not by way of the tzimtzum. In other words, even the kav was affected by the tzimtzum. Shahariya tzimtzum haya ba'or, because the tzimtzum was in the or itself. Now, this is a very important point in Chabad Chassidus. The Gra and various others, Emmanuel Chayriki, Mishnas Chassidim, explain the tzimtzum kipshutai, that the tzimtzum was in atzmus, not in the oir. But he says explicitly here, the shita as it is, shita Zabal Shem Tov, in Kisvei Arizal, that the tzimtzum was in the oir and not in atzmus. And even though it says tzimtzem atzmoi, it says nevertheless tzimtzem atzmoi but tocha or shelo. Okay. In other words, it wasn't something else that was mitzamtzem. He was mitzamtzem himself, so to speak. Okay, but it was mitzamtzem what? The oir. In any event, the tzimtzum was in the oir. As known, the lifnei tzimtzum haya gilu b'chinas ein sof mamash. Prior to the tzimtzum was only the gilu the ein sof. And he's going to quote the Eitz Chaim, where we learn this from. As it writes in the beginning of Eitz Chaim, and similarly Oitzos Chaim and Sharak Domes and various other places, the Terem Shenetzlu HaNetzolim, before all the Netzolim excuse me, the emanated things were made before they emerged. There was only this or Parshat, the or Ein Sof. That's all there was. There was nothing else. There was Atzilus and or Ein Sof. That's all there was. What's the or Ein Sof? A gilu of Atzilus. So there was or Elyon Parshat Mamalik Kol Matzias. This was the entire Matzias was the or Ein Sof. That's all there was. Or Elyon Parshat. Parshat meaning not Murkav. The opposite of Murkav. Parshat, simple. In other words, uncompounded. That's the meaning of simplicity here, means that it was uncompounded. Not like light, that we have physical light. You put light through a prism, you see that light is compounded of like 7 different colors or whatever it is. There's many colors making up light. But the light of the Or Ein Sof is uncompounded. It's not that there's an Or of Gvura, an Or of Chesed, an Or of Tiferes, and so on and so forth mixed into the oil, and therefore it looks like white light, like physical light. No, it was an or Elyon Pashat. It was uncompounded by anything, and was Mamale Kol Metzius. It filled all of existence. That's all there was in existence. There was no head, there was no butt in the tail, there was no beginning, there was no end. Completely unified in every direction. It was all one light without any distinctions within it. And that's called the Or Ein Sof. All right, this is all from quotations from the Arizal. And we will see how he speaks about the Indian of the Tzimtzum. The Indian of Tzimtzum who, and the concept of Tzimtzum that limited this light, who shenis alem bechinas Or Ein Sof v'nimshach or bechinas midu mishkal fi erech ha'olemus. And the Tzimtzum brought about that the Or should be drawn down according to the needs, the midah mishkal, the weight, so to speak, of each particular world. The higher the world, the more Or it would need, and the lower the world, the less Or it would need, so to speak. In other words, the amount of Or is adjusted to what type of world it is. Nevertheless, the Ikar in the Tzimtzum was not that there would be light that's shaykh to various madregas in the Or. The Ikar Inyan of the Tzimtzum is in order to bring about the Inyan of Kalim, in order to bring about the Kalim. Okay, so what's the Inyan of the Tzimtzum? The Inyan of the Tzimtzum is two things really. One Inyan in the Tzimtzum is Shinis Alem Bechinas Ein Sof. So the Inyan of Ein Sof, in other words, not the Or Ein Sof only, but that the Inyan of Ein Sof, the Inyan of infinity, the Inyan that's Ein Sof, the infinity, the Eibishter, so to speak, is what is concealed. The Ein Sof in the Or Ein Sof is what's concealed. And the Or is drawn forth or is drawn down in a limited way. Right, so first of all, initially was the Or Elyon Parshat Memalim Kol Metzias. Lo haya bechinas rosh v'sof. There was no beginning, there was no end, etc. Infinite Or. Or echad Parshat Shava b'Hashvoah. It was equal everywhere, and that was called what was called Or Ein Sof. And then came the Tzimtzum. What did the Tzimtzum do? The Tzimtzum didn't remove the Or per se; it just removed the Inyan of the Ein Sof in the Or. Right, so there will be an Or, as we'll see, which is the Or Hakav, but nevertheless, the Ein Sofiyut of the Or was removed. The absolute Ein Sofiyut, the absolute, like, infinite aspect of the Or was now not removed, but concealed. Okay, and what was there then drawn down? Nimshach Or Midu Mishkal was drawn down in a measured kind of a way. Lefi erech ha'olam is according to the needs of the world. In other words, the Or was nimshach in such a way that a higher olam would get a greater level of Or, and more, in other words, not only in quantity, but also in quality. And the lower olamas would get a lower quantity and a lower quality of Or. Okay. But nevertheless, even though that's one of the inyanim that the Tzimtzum did, the other inyan that the Tzimtzum did was as follows: that brought about the inyan of the Kalim. Now he's going to explain shortly how the Or Ein Sof brought about the inyan of the Kalim. The inyan, the Tzimtzum brought about the Kalim. As Eitz Chaim writes in the first Shar of Eitz Chaim, the first be right at the beginning of Eitz Chaim, Sof Anaf Gimel, at the end of Anaf Gimel. Anaf, as you probably know, the chapters in Eitz Chaim are divided into Anafim. Anafim means limbs, or like limbs of a tree, branches. They're divided into branches. Why? Because it's Eitz Chaim, and therefore the branches are called, or the chapters are called Anafim. So Anaf Gimel, Sof Anaf Gimel, at the end of the third chapter, end of the third branch, the Tzorech HaTzimtzum hu Kedai La'asos B'chinas HaKelim. Right over there, one of the purposes in the Tzimtzum, not only to hide the Ein Sofiyut, to conceal that inyan, but that there will be a possibility for Kelim to be created. The Tzorech HaTzimtzum hu Kedai La'asos B'chinas HaKelim. Ki al adei HaTzimtzum ha'or u'miyutoi, through the inyan of Tzimtzum, through the removal, the histalkus of the or, and then the mute or that was nimshach afterwards, the reduction, the reduced light that was drawn down subsequently, yeshev sharius there, or yeshev sharus, there's a possibility for the kli to be revealed. Liz havus v'liz galus a kli, for the kli to come into being and to be revealed. Now, it's not that there were kalim in the Or Ein Sof. That's not what it means. It's not that there were kalim in the Or Ein Sof. There weren't. There aren't even kalim in the world of Ak, as you'll point out shortly. But the removal of the Or, and then the hamshocha of the Or in a way of mute, the drawing down of the Or by the way of the Kav in a limited fashion, that gave the possibility for kalim to be created. And he's going to explain this further. The Hinei, HaKalim hem bechinas metzius davar. The kalim are a metzius. They're an existent, right? They're existent. It's a metzius. It's a thing that the kalim and yonim that exist. They're limited and they exist. And when the Or Ein Sof was illuminating, it wasn't possible for the kalim to exist. Why? Because since the inyan of a kli is a limitation, as we explained in the beginning, that the inyan of the kalim is what separates the Or Maki from the Or Pnimi. So therefore, when there was a Gilu of Or Ein Sof, there was not even a possibility for the kalim to exist. There couldn't be any Or Pnimi. And there was no possibility, therefore, for the kalim to exist. The existence of the kalim couldn't come about. Even subsequently after the tzimtzum, there's no kli even in Adam Kadmoin itself. Because what's Adam Kadmoin? After the histalkus ha'or, so it left after the tzimtzum, the histalkus ha'or, that left a halal, a makum panoi, an empty void, a void empty, devoid of oil. Then the Or HaKav is nimshach, the light of the Kav is nimshach into the halal, into the makum panoi, and it goes around the inner perimeter, the inner perimeter, the inner perimeter of the halal. Right, like just if you imagine the halal sort of like a swimming pool kind of thing, a round swimming pool, so to speak, right? It goes around the wall. What's the wall? There's no wall, obviously, but it's the defining area where there's no Or Ein Sof. The beginning, the dividing line between yes Or Ein Sof and no Or Ein Sof, that's called the wall, so to speak, of the halal. Right? So the Or comes into the halal, goes around that perimeter, that outer perimeter, once, and then goes around again, and goes around again, and goes around again. In other words, if I would draw it, let me just, I think I need to draw something here. Whiteboard. Okay, 1 second. Let me get the whiteboard. There we go. Okay, So this is how it works, right? Let's say there's the halal. There's the halal. Now the halal is round and not like, it doesn't look like an egg like this one looks like, but just assume that the halal is round, right? The halal is where there's no oil, right? There's no or, the or is being removed, or at least according to the way it's explained in Chassidus, it's being completely hidden. It's moved up to a higher madrega that's no longer revealed, just like a higher wavelength of light would make it invisible light, right? Would make it invisible, wouldn't be visible light. So, in any event, the halal comes in then. The halal comes in. No, I'm sorry. The kav comes into the halal. That's halal is empty, devoid of light. The kav comes into the halal, and it goes around the halal. Right? It goes around this perimeter of the halal, so to speak. Right? And again, I'm not drawing very good circles here, but it goes around once, and it goes around a second time, and it goes around a third time, and it goes around all together. Goes all together 10 times, right? Like the skins of an onion, so to speak, right? The highest, and these are called the igulim. In Kabbalah, these are called the igulim, the or igul, which is an or makif, right? There's no or pnimi as yet. So all of those oirois are just oirois makifim. Okay, let's go back to our text. Where were we? Yeah, here we are. וגם המדרגה שאחר הצמצום, הרי בבחינת אק לא יש עדיין מציאות הכלים. There's no kelim in ak. It's only oiros of igulim. That's all there are. There's no kelim there as yet. Why? מפני שהאור מאיר שם בגילוי. Because in the olam of Adam Kadmoin, Ha'or Meir Sham Begilu, the Or is in a state of revelation over there, and therefore it's not gonna, there's no possibility for it to be Kalim. The Hainu B'chinas Atzmus HaKav. The essence of the Kav is what illuminates the Halal initially. Shemeir Sham Begilu Mamish. Revealed. And therefore, it's not possible for it to be Kalim in the world of Adam Kadmoin. Even in Akudim, there's only one Kli. Now, let me just explain what Akudim is. The way it's explained graphically speaking, is that there are certain aspects of Adam Kadmoin which are depicted by, they're depicted by, like in the human form, by the eyes, the ears, the nose, and the mouth, right? 5 different oiros. There's 5 different oiros, which is called the oir of the ears, the oir of the nose, the oir of the eyes, the oir of the mouth, right? Oir, the light that comes out of those orifices, kaviocho, right? Those orifices in the head. One of those that comes out is called the light of Akudim. That is where the first Kli starts to happen. But there's only one Kli. In other words, you have Esa oiros, you have 10 oiros in one Kli. So you can imagine what kind of a Kli it is. If it's a Kli to be able to contain 10 different oiros, it's a Kli which is not defined in the way that Kalim are normally defined. The world of Akudim is before the world of Nikudim. Nikudim is the oir that, Nikudim is another name for the world of Tohu. Right, so this is before the world of Tohu, the world of Akudim. Kulam Akudim, the Kli Achas. They're all Akud, they're all bound together in one Kli. Okay, so that's the world of Akudim. So Akudim is called part of Ak. It's the extension of Ak through one of those orifices. I'm not going to go into it now, it's a complicated issue. But suffice it to say that this is an or that comes out of Ak, so to speak. Right? So Gamba Akudim, even the world of Akudim, is Kli Echad. So there's no kalim in the Or Ein Sof, and there's no kalim so there's no kalim in the Kav, and there's no kalim in the Or Ein Sof, and even in Ak itself, there's no kalim until Akudim. Because Shekhem is Gilu Ha'or, and so Shevrinei Tzimtzum, how much more so, in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, there are no kalim. Lo haya efshar klal yosis abus kalim, no possibility for kli. Came out of that Tzimtzum Dafka. It had to be the Tzimtzum had to come about first in order for there to be his Galus Kli. The lack of or, the Tzimtzum brings about a lack of or, a lack of revelation, lack of or, and Gilui, a lack of the revelation of or. So then Yachol Yosis Avus Kalim, only then can there be the Indian of Kalim. Who mean Gufa Tzimtzum Atzmoi. And the beginning of the Indian of Kalim is from the Tzimtzum itself. Now, he'll explain what this means. It's not so straightforward. But basically, the idea is that since the Tzimtzum is Heder Ha'or, right, the Tzimtzum brings about the lack of or. Where's the lack of or? In a certain space. It's called the Halal or the Makom Panui, right? The empty, the area that's devoid of or. So because there's an inyan of devoid, so the or is kept out of there, so to speak. That keeping out the or is already an inyan of din. It's an inyan of gevura, an inyan of limitation. It's an inyan of limit. It's not actually a limitation, it's an inyan of limitation. Right? So this is what brings about the inyan of Kalim, as I'll explain. Tchilas is avusan, who mean gufa tzimtzum atzmo, k'mosh Beis Chaim, as it says there, Ayin Beis, the inyan atzimtzum hu galo is shorish adin, is to reveal the shorish, the root of the inyan of din, the root of the inyan of limitation in one sense or another. And in a note over there in Eitz Chaim, he explains the shorish adin u'bechinas hamakoim shu dugmas hakelim. The inyan of din is the makom. What I said before was the makom panui, which is the inyan of a kli. In other words, that void is like a kli. It's a kli that's at this moment empty, but it's sort of in the sense of a kli, in the sense that there's nothing in it. It's kept, everything is kept out, and that's where it will contain all of the oilimus within it at a later stage. Well, Mishnas Chasidim, written by Emmanuel Chayriki, and other Makubal, post Arizal, who made a kitzur. His Sefer Mishnas Chasidim is like an encyclopedia of Kabbalah, starting over all the way from the beginning, essentially just before the Tzimtzum until through the Tzimtzum, and then all the way through the Oilibus and so on. It's a worthwhile Sefer to own. Mishnas Chasidim, Emmanuel Chayriki, he only made one mistake in the Sefer that we know, that's spoken about anyway, and that is he took the Tzimtzum Kipshutoy. He understood the Tzimtzum in a simple, straightforward sense, that it is Histolkus Ha'or, that Silekes Ha'or, he removed the Or. Whereas in Chassidus is explained that he didn't remove the Or per se, he concealed the Or so that it looks like it's removed, right? But the Or is still there. In any event, Mishnas Chasidim Kasov, Himsi Shorish Adin b'mashet tzimtzum atzmoi. The fact that it's tzimtzum atzmoi, and Chassidus would have said tzimtzum oiroi, not tzimtzum atzmoi, because the tzimtzum wasn't in atzmoi, in the oir. But nevertheless, he goes according to Yishita. So, Mishnas Chasidim Himsa Shorish Adin b'mashet tzimtzum atzmoi. He was metzamtzim himself. That was the tzimtzum was the Shorish Adin. Behind the makom hu halal. The makom is the halal, the void, the empty space, the makom panui, as it's called as well, in which all of the worlds will in the future exist. So there's this makom panui with the or Ein Sof. The or Ein Sof is concealed therein. It's moved up to a high madrega, therefore it's concealed. And that halal is where all the elements will be able to exist. Because why? Because the or Ein Sof is no longer visible. It no longer would overwhelm any limited existence. And it's explained elsewhere. This is actually explained in Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe. This is the Rishimu. That's within the Halal. What's the Rishimu? The Rishimu is, just as we said before, from Avodas HaKodesh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has Koach HaBli Gvul, and he has Koach HaBilti Bal Gvul, or rather, just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu has Koach HaBilti Bal Gvul, unlimited Koach, he also has a Koach in limitation, Koach HaGvul. If you say one of them doesn't exist, you're detracting from his completeness. So you have to say there's a Koach HaGvul. That Koach HaGvul is what becomes the Rishimu. That Koach HaGvul, once the Koach HaBli Gvul has been concealed, then the koach hagvul becomes evident. The koach hagvul is completely covered over, so to speak, by the koach habligvul. But as soon as the koach habligvul is concealed, or and removes the oil so that the oil is concealed, then the koach hagvul comes into play, and that koach hagvul is the rishimo. Okay, so where does that rishimo exist? It exists b'toch halal. In other words, in the place where the Or Sof has been removed, where the koach habligvul has been removed or been concealed, that's where the koach hagvul now becomes revealed. This is the place that the tzimtzum reveals. The oiros do not come about by way of the tzimtzum. The rishimo comes about by way of the tzimtzum. The oiros do not come from the tzimtzum. The oiros come from the kav. Why? Because from heder you cannot get, from negative you can't get positive. From removal of light you're not going to get light. Right? The light that's removed or concealed so that it looks like it's removed, that cannot become the gilui, as he explains. From heder you cannot have gilui. From revelation, from concealment, from lack, you cannot have revelation. Where does the or come from? The or comes from a gilui that's brought down after the tzimtzum, i.e. the gilui hakav. The hamshachas or Ein Sof, it comes from the Or Ein Sof itself. The kav is attached to the Or Ein Sof. The kav is not attached to the tzimtzum, but it's affected by the tzimtzum, as we'll see. Hisavos hakelim bepoil, and hisavos hakelim bepoil who gam shezeu gam kemei kav, even though it's also from the kav. You have to have the energy of the kav in order for the kelim to actually be a metzias. The kelim have to be alive, so to speak. The kelim have to be there, and they can't be there without any or whatsoever. They have to have their own or in them in order to be able to contain an or. We'll explain that at a later stage. In any event, even though it's also from the kav, because from the kav comes the entire ishtalshlus, as we said before. The beginning of Hishtalshlus is the beginning of Ak, and Ak was that the Kav comes into the Halal, and it's Chozem is Agal, as we drew the diagram previously. Just to go back to it, the Kav comes into the Halal, Chozem is Agal, it goes around and around and around and around, right? And that creates the Ese Gulim of Ak, the Ese Spherois of the world of Ak itself. They're not called Spherois, really, they're called the Gulim, but nevertheless, that's the idea, and that's the beginning of the entire Seder Ishtalshlus. Everything else then emerges from Ak and then Atzilus and so on and so forth. In any event, the kav becomes clothed within the rishimo. The rishimo is what actually limits the oyer and gives it certain characteristics. Just like you would say that a person has a thought, he has to put, in order to communicate that thought, he has to put it into words, right? So at first, he puts it into words in his own head. In other words, you don't see any revelation from the person. You know he's thinking about something, but what he's thinking about, you don't know yet because he's busy arranging the words in his head. But at the moment, those words that he arranges are still in his thoughts. Therefore, the kelim are on the madrega of machshava, right? Only later on does it come out b'dibur. Does it come out in speech? So those in yonim is like the kav going into the rishimo. That's like the machshava, like the oisis hamachshava, the words of machshava. When the kav comes into olam atzilus, that's already b'koichat dibur, right? As we'll see. And that's the way that the kelim are created by the oir. In other words, the oir and the kli work together in machshava before they come into reality in dibur. You could say, in a sense, from the thickening of the oir, that's where the kli comes from. The kli is not something different from the oir. It's his abusa or it's the thickening of the or that sort of congeals into the oisius of the kli. In other words, the thought and the words that can express that thought have a relationship. The words that express the thought are congealment of the thought, so to speak. Right? He's going to speak about this in of his abus and what it means. His abus means thickening in English, right? The in his abus from the word av, with an I. The in his abus who bola. So the concept of his abus is that's the limitation. And that's the limitation and the metzius and the coming to existence, limited existence of the or. It comes about through something else. The or comes about through the rishimo. The metzius comes about through the rishimo. And as we were just about to, as we just gave the moshel, the letters in seichel, shekol inyan sichli, harayesh bo oisius. Any intellectual concept has the way in which it can be expressed true to its character, right? Because you can use words which don't express anything, like academics often use. Yeah, they just use words which don't seem to actually mean anything. It's just it comes to obscure the oil rather than to reveal it. As you can see, I don't have an issue with academics to a certain extent because whatever. Any intellectual concept has the way in which it can be expressed, which are called oisius. But mashi is labish is gale. The letters in which it can be, the letters and words in which can be clothed and revealed. That even before it becomes into gilui in thought, it has the oisius in a concealed sort of a way. In other words, if you want to express idea, let's say, I don't know, let's just take a concept that everyone is familiar with. You want to explain the speed of light equals mc squared. Right now, that concept of E equals mc squared, because it's true to what the nature of light is, so it's, so to speak, already buried within the light, that concept. How it can be explained is part of what it is. Right, so again, the oasis in it are sort of hidden, so to speak. Afterwards, it becomes oasis in which the seichel becomes clothed. It's not that the letters are actually there as part of the seichel. It comes about as his abus ha-seichel. The seichel gets thickened, so to speak, into the letters, so to speak. The is called or seichel, because if it was that this particular seichel has letters already embedded within it, then you would only be able to express that seichel in one way. But the fact is, you can express many ideas in various different ways. You can express an inyan mitzad history. You can express an inyan mitzad art. You can express the same inyan mitzad sort of scientific concepts, whatever that inyan may happen to be, right? There's different ways of expressing it. And two scientists, even if they're in the same discipline, will probably express it differently. Yes, once it's written in a formula equals MC squared. I guess that, but that itself, you can, that's just letters. You can explain it, that speed of light is twice the speed of the mass and whatever, and etc. Right? Whatever equals mc squared, mass times twice the speed of light. Anyway. Okay. So, and that's not the case. That's not the case. It's not that the oasis are embedded in the seichel, it's that they come about through the seichel. The seichel finds a way to express itself through oasis. Okay. And that would be called his abus ha-seichel, the thickening of the seichel into the congealing of the seichel into letters by which can be expressed. More kain, and similarly means abu sa'or, it's like boy. Similarly with the thickening of the oil, which is the limitations thereof, shalader rishimo, that's the rishimo. Mizen is how kalim. From this, the kalim come about. In other words, the kalim come about through the rishimo. The or shines into the rishimo, picks up the letters that are shaykh to that oil, and makes the kalim that are shaykh to particular oils. For shorsha ma'imiti, but the true shorish of the kalim is the rishimo. Even though it comes about through the or, but nevertheless, the inyan of the kalim is that it comes from the rishimo. The kalim comes from the rishimo, which is from koach hagvul, as we explained. Is havus, only what? They come into actuality, otherwise it would remain hidden. Right? They remain hidden in thought, so to speak. Because anything to actually exist in actuality must be brought into existence by some kind of gilui. Okay. Well, etzem shorish is avusan ma'arishimu, but the kalim come from the rishimu, not from the oir. They're only picked up by the oir, as we said. Shorish oiros hain mi etzem hakav, the root of the beginning of the oiros, and the root of the oiros is the kav. Shugila or in social tzimtzum shenimshach achar tzimtzum. This is the orange suffering before the tzimtzum that is brought down after the tzimtzum. All kain or oiros hain blima, and therefore the oiros are called oiros blima. Lo b'chinas mahus metzius davar. They call oiros are called blima. In other words, they don't have a metzius as such. They're blima. They don't have physicality in any way. They're blima without a mahus per se, because they're oiros. It's the inyan of oiros that it doesn't have a mahus per se. Only together with the oisias, that's what makes the memutza. And as we said before, we were explaining the inyan of Atzilus, that Atzilus is a memutza between Orein Sof and Oilemis, and therefore Atzilus has to have is a memutza, and it has to have two qualities. It has to have qualities of the what's before the memutza, and it has to have qualities of what comes after the memutza. In other words, qualities of Orein Sof and qualities of Nivroim. And that's why Atzilus has both of them. It has the Oiros, which is the Orein Sof, and has the inyan of Kalim, which is the inyan of Nivroim. Zeu Beis HaMadregesh Memutza the Atzilus Sha'oiros Hain Ma'orein Sof Ma'atzil Sheba HaMemutza from the Orein Sof, as we said, Va'Kalim Hain Mash Be'erech HaNivroim. The Kalim are Be'erech to the Nivroim, even though the Kalim of Atzilus are not directly. There still has to go through a whole process before they can actually become Nivroim, created beings, but nevertheless, that is the inyan of the Kalim. It's Be'erech, it's in the same, they live in the same, on the same planet, so to speak, even though they might be far apart. V'hine Yadua. Now, here is where the Rebbe returns now to the beginning of the Maamer. The beginning of the Maamer, Oite Oyer Kasalma, Noite Shomayim Kayeria. So you ask the question at the beginning of the Maamer, what is this Indian of Oite Oyer Kasalma? He spreads out or like a garment, like a simla, like a sheet, like a garment, a sheet. If it's or, how's it a sheet? Seem to be two different things, contradictory. And how does that relate to the second part of the pasuk? Noite shomayim kayiriya, it stretches out the heavens like a curtain. Okay, so he's going to explain. V'hine yedua, the Torah gamken memutza, ben orein sof el oilemis. The Torah is also memutza. Not only is Atzilus a memutza, but the Torah itself is a memutza between orein sof el oilemis. In other words, the Torah has both things in it. It has the inyan of orein sof and it has the inyan of kalim, as we'll see. Maamer. On the one hand, it says, Chazal tell us, he's talking about rights of Bara Alma. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked into the Torah and created the world. This is found in Zohar. It's also found in Midrash Rabbah. He's talking about rights of Bara Alma. HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks into the Torah and creates the world. In other words, that the worlds come from the Torah. That's one aspect of the memutza, right? One aspect of the memutza is Bara Alma. From the Raisa, he created the world. From the Torah, he created the world. The other aspect is Istakel. Right? He looked into. The looking into is the Orein Sof aspect of it. He's going to explain. HaTorah omeres, the Torah says about itself, Ani hayisi kli u'manasa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's implement to create the world. I was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's implement to create the world. Why? Istakal ba'araisa, he looked into the Torah. In other words, when it says Istakal ba'araisa, it doesn't mean he only looked into the Torah, he in fact put himself into the Torah. As we know from the word Anoichi, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, Anoichi Misha Anoichi, put myself into Ana Nafshik Savis Sahabis. Right? I gave myself in writing. The word Anoichi is a not recon of Ana Nafshik Savis Sahabis. I gave myself in writing. In other words, in the Torah itself is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? That's the Istakal ba'araisa. And then there's the Bar Alma, is how the world is created through the oasis of the Torah, as I'll explain. The Kiyum Kol HaDvarim, that the continued existence of everything, Dvarim Gashmiyim, of the physical things in this world, V'hisavusan, and in fact the creation, Ma'ayin Liyesh, ex nihilo, from nothing, Hu Alidei Torah, this comes about through Torah. Which Torah? The Torah of the world of Asiya. There's a Torah in the world of Asiya, Torah in the world of Yetzirah, Torah in the world of Bria, Torah in the world of Atzilus. These generally are explained as the four madregas of Torah. The first madrega of Torah is the inyan of Pshat, Pshuta Shel Mikra, right? Pshat. Then there's the inyan of Remez, that's Olam Yetzirah. Then there's the inyan of Drash, which is Olam HaBria. And there's the inyan of Soid, which is Olam Atzilus. And in fact, there's another madrega, a further madrega, which is the inyan of Chassidus. Okay, we'll get to that on another occasion. So, who are the Torah Dasiya? The continued maintenance of things in this world is through the Torah in Asiya, the outermost aspect of the Torah. Everything that's written in the Torah, for example, Kodesh Baruch Hu said there have to be a Rekiya. Tachai Aretz Desher, like let the grasses come forth and so on. All of those things that we created through the 10 utterances all rely, so to speak, on the Torah for their continued existence. If we would stop saying one of those, one of the Asara Maamoros, Shebahem Nivra Olam, if you would stop saying one of those utterances by which the world was created, everything will return to a state of nothingness, as we know from Shari Yichu Emunah. That's the existence and the chayus of that particular thing. There's certain inyonim in the Torah that are not said explicitly. They only said beremes. That's already on the madrega of the world of Yetzirah, and therefore it's a malachim. The malachim are hidden from our view. They're not in the world of Asiya. They were in the world of Yetzirah, and therefore they're more shaykh to. Although there are malachim that are shaykh to the world of Asiya as well, the Ifanim and so on. But the Ikar Inyan malachim is the world of Yetzirah. In any event, and that's what Chazal say, Dibru Chachomim b'hoive. Yeah, that the Chachomim spoke about things in the present. In other words, they didn't speak about things in the past, the way things would be in the future. They speak about when it's talking about halacha, it's talking about b'hoive. Halacha now, current inyonim. But this is explained a little bit differently in Hasidic text, as he explains it over here. When it says Dibur Chachomim b'hoive, they're speaking about in current situations, not in Olam Yonim. They're speaking about in the current world. Hainu be his havus. They're talking about his havus, bringing the world into being. That's what they were talking about. In other words, the way the world comes into being from the Torah. There's Torah in every world, as we just explained. In the world of Yetzirah, Bria, Atzilus is an in of Torah there. This brings the connection of Or Ein Sof to that world is through the Torah of that world. So the Torah of the world of Bria is through Drash, right? The world of Bria is connected to the Or Ein Sof through the inyan of Torah Drash. Mamutza and the Torah ain't a mamutza shebo oilamis. But nevertheless, the Torah as a mamutza is not like the mamutza in oilamis. The mamutza in oilamis is oilam atzilus, between Or Ein Sof and the oilamis. But nevertheless, the Torah ain't a mamutza shebo oilamis. It's not like the mamutza between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the oilamis. She'enu nimshach b'chinas atzmus ki im ha'or levad. Because in the mamutza of between Ora and Sof and Oilimus, it's only Ha'ora. The Kav is a Ha'ora. And even though the Kav is revealed in Olam Atzilus, it's a Ha'ora. Masha'enken in the Torah, that's not a Ha'ora. It's Mamash Atzvus. But Torah and Mamutza Mafsik. In Torah, there's no Mamutza which is Mafsik. In other words, what's a Mamutza Mafsik? A Mamutza Mafsik is that it connects the two things, but it doesn't bring the higher thing into the lower thing. It only connects the lower to the higher. It's in the connection. But the Torah doesn't have a memutzaim. In other words, a person learns Torah, pshat in Torah. Down in this world, there's the Izgalus of Or Ein Sof, Mamish Or Ein Sof, Atzmus. But Torah en memutzaim mafsik. But Nimshach b'chinas ha'atzmius chulu. Atzmus is Nimshach, Kmosh Gaz Maamer, and there's a number of different memorim that deal with this issue. Vayorad Havai al Har Sinai, Tafshin Tezvav is one of them. There's many others. Nevertheless, there has to be this in between. There has to be the Indian of Torah in order to bring Atzmus into reality in the world in which we live. Memutza, Kol Mishneh Madregas, and as every memutza, there's two madregas. Inyan Pnimis HaTorah, Chitzonis HaTorah. So there's Pnimis HaTorah, Soid, and then Chitzonis HaTorah, which is the Inyan on the lowest madregas, the Inyan of Pshat, and the Inyan of Halachas, and so on. And then there's the Pnimis HaTorah, which is the Ta'amei HaChaim Zochu, those who taste that are B'nai Olam Haba, and they inherit Olam Haba. The Chitzonis HaTorah, Harubah B'Hadbolot, Mol Eitrevis Ve'el Ksheris. The Chitzonis HaTorah comes into all kinds of limitations. That's Shulchan Aruch, right? There's a kosher that's not kosher. There's a treif, and so on and so forth, right? That's the Chitzonis HaTorah. Sheyesh Mida v'Shiur l'chol davar. There's the limitations, and there's a Mida, there's a Shiur, there's a tefillin have to be dafka 4 batim and 4 tefillin sharosh. Have to be dafka 4 parashas and dafka in this order, and have to be written in this way, and it's very medakdek how it has to be exactly. The same thing with tzitzis, 32 chutin altogether, and so on, and have to be bound in a certain way, and everything has its limitations exactly how it has to be. So then it's on oilimus, because this is the Indian of oilimus, that's where the limitation is. Shem b'chinas gvul. Aval pnimius HaTorah, but the pnimius HaTorah en lamidu gvul klal. There's no gvul in Pnimis HaTorah. In other words, in the Indian of Soidus HaTorah, that's the Indian of Atzmus. G'disa, as Chazal say in the Midrash, l'chol yesh sikus chutz me'HaTorah. Everything has its limitation other than Torah. She'en la sikus. That there's no limitation, there's no end, there's no. Okay, I hope you're back on track. Something happened with the microphone. I don't know what part of it, but I don't know if it stopped recording. It didn't stop recording. In any event, we were saying that that the Torah is there's no sequence, there's no limitation, there's no end, there's no end point in the Torah. And what are we talking about? This is dafka in pnimis Torah, that there's no limitations, no end. There's no bechina or gvul dafka in pnimis Torah. Masha ein keine. Chitzonis Torah, in the halachas of the Torah, there dafka talks about the Indian of gvul. This is kosher. This is not kosher. This is how tefillin have to be. That's how tzitzis have to be. And this is the Indian of Shabbos, and that's not the Indian of Shabbos. That's chilul Shabbos, and so on and so forth. That's the bli gvul of Torah. And that's why it says in the pasuk that we started off with, Oite or kasalma. He spreads out the or like a salma, like a garment. In other words, there's some kind of limitation. A garment is not the inyan of or; it's what covers over, it conceals the or. Or kasalma shahem beis madregas or. There's two madregas in the or. The bechinas pnimius. One is the inner aspect of the or, which is oir, and then there's the chitzonius of the oir, as we'll see. So the pnimius of oir, bechinas or ein sof shebetorah, that's in of or ein sof. The salma hu chitzonius of Torah, the aspect of chitzonius, the salma, the garment that covers over. Shu bechinas levush hama'alim, the garment that conceals. Es oir conceals the light. Sheyuchlu ha'olam es lekabloi, that the world can now be able to accept the inyan of this oil, of this Ayin Sof. This is written in Tanya Ayin Beis. This is what it says in Tanya. The Shechina itself, the Shechina cannot, the world cannot receive or bear a Gilui of the Shechina. Why? Because it's much too high for them. They would just disintegrate. So how do we receive the Shechina? With a lavush. So you have to have the inyan of lavush that conceals. What's the lavush that can conceal and clothe the Shechina? So the worlds will not become bottle. They're nullified, and their existence will not be nullified. In the order of Torah, who Ratzon Yisborach. This is the Ratzon. Ratzon Yisborach Chochmah, the Ratzon and Chochmah Hashem, which is Melubash in the Torah. Melubash in the Torah mitzvahs, which are clothed in Torah mitzvahs. Aniglos lanu levanenu adkan lashoinoi. Those which are the Torah mitzvahs which are revealed to us and to our children and so on and so forth. Adkan lashon Alter Rebbe. That's what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya and Perek Nun Beis. V'hainu, this means to say, in the lavush of Torah, in the lavush, which is called the Torah, there's also an inyan of atzmus mamish. We said the Torah is also memutzaim. The memutzaim is or ein sof, but nevertheless, there's a hagabola, which is the chitzonis of Torah. Pnimis of Torah, chitzonis of Torah. The lavush of Torah, the chitzonis of Torah, nimshach gamken b'chinas atzmus mamish. But it also has atzmus, not like the world of Atzilus, where the world of Atzilus is a hefsek between or ein sof and oilamis. Masha ein kain. The lavush of Torah is a mechaber. It's not a mafsik. It's mechaber or ein sof and oilamis. Rakshu v'chinas lavush hama'alim. Nevertheless, it has to conceal al kopanim she'enu meir b'gilui chulu, that the or ein sof is not meir b'gilui now. But in the future, there will be a revelation of Atzilus or Ein Sof. How are they bechinas pnimis Torah, through pnimis Torah? To'amei chaim zochu, right? Those who taste it will be worthy of chaim nitzchiyim. In other words, pnimis Torah. If you taste pnimis Torah, bechinas pnimis Torah, k'moshe gazu b'sev shebenin perek lamed vav, as written in Tanya perek lamed vav. V'lazeh nasan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. This is what it says. This is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Bnei Yisrael the Torah. It's a Torah shenikres ois. The Torah is called ois, koyach. Right? It gives you koyach to be able to bring or ein sof into the world. L'kamel scharam la'asid lavoy. To receive, and why is it called ois? So that we can receive our reward in the world to come. But through doing what? Through using the ois of Torah to bring Elokus into Gilui, into the world. Lishun lavush, in the future we'll get it without any lavushim. V'haya einecha ro'es es marecha. V'hayu einecha ro'es es marecha. In the future, your eyes will see your teacher, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what happened, and in fact, similar thing happened at the time of Matan Torah. Havai himself came down on Har Sinai into the Metzias. The whole Giluim Shiyul Asid, that all the revelations of the future, were already at the time of Matan Torah, because Galus, that were already revealed then. The Fi Sha'ah, temporarily. Therefore, every time HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke, the neshamas flew out of their bodies. Why? Because they couldn't handle, the goof couldn't handle their lokus. Right? So, therefore, the neshamas flew out of the bodies and they have to be returned to the bodies through Tal Torah. I'll explain another time. And it was the neshamas were returned with, it says Tal Torah. Here he says Tal Tchiyah. The tal that will be in the future, Machaya Mesim. What's Machaya Mesim? Bringing the Shoma back to the Guf. In any event, that's what happened at that time, that the Tal Torah, Tal Tchiyah, revived the Guf after the Neshama had left it at the time of Matan Torah. Shu Tal Torah, this is called the dew of the Torah itself. The Tal is a distilled essence of the Torah, Shnikras Ois. And the Torah itself is called Oish. This is the Indian of spreading out the oil like a garment. In other words, oil and salma, two different inyonim, two parts of the memutza. These are the two madrigas of memutza. On the one hand, oil, on the other hand, salma. The Torah, Yachol Yos is Chabrus, the Or Ein Sof, and you can have the connection between Or Ein Sof and the world. And in the second part of the pasuk, Noite Shomayim, that he stretches out the heavens, Kayuri, like a curtain, that's connected to Oite Orka Salma, stretching out the light like a garment. In order that the Shamayim can be spread out like the heaven. What is the Indian of the Shamayim, the heavens? That's in the Ruchnius of the Gashmias, right? In order for that to be able to happen, that has to come about through Oita Orka Salma. It comes about through the two madrigas of Torah that we just explained. So in the Kitzur, and I'm hurrying it up a little bit at the end, but we've been going for quite a while. So we explained that over here, in order to be able to explain this Inyan, how it is that Or Ein Sof and Oilemis can both exist. Actually, Olam Atzilus. So he wanted to explain the Inyan of Olam Atzilus. So he said, "There's Atzilus is a memutza. Bechinas a memutza bein Or Ein Sof lo Oilemis ben Nivroin. Atzilus is the memutza between Oilemis on the one hand and a Kodesh Baruch Hu on the other. Based on Dragish memutza, there's two levels in a memutza. These are the ores, which are the infinite aspect, and the kalim, which are the finite. Kalim are the Inyan of Gvul, Umetzia Sheba Atzilus. That's the Gvul and the Gvul in Atzilus. We said before that Atzilus is a memutza, and therefore it has two characteristics. On the one hand, it's Ba'en Aroch to Atzmus, to Or Ein Sof, and because of the Kalim therein, and nevertheless, it's Giloi Hahelem, because it's after all still Oir. Well, Oir is Haim Bli Metzias, but the Oirs in Atzilus are without Metzias, they're not physicalized. Kishor Shar Me'akav, they come from the Kav, Shenim Shach Or Ein Sof Shel Bnei HaTzimtzum, which comes in fact from the Or Ein Sof, prior to the Tzimtzum, even though it's affected by the Tzimtzum. Even though it's drawn down through the Tzimtzum, in the Ikar Tzimtzum, which really is almost a Kalim. The Ikar Kavon and the Tzimtzum is that there should be Kalim, that the Kalim should come into existence, the Kalim should come into Gilui. Mashi Nimtza Al Yadoi Hu Nekudas HaRishima. Shenimtza Al Yadoi Hu Nekudas HaRishima. The Tzimtzum brings about the Inyan of the main point of the Rishima, the inner point of the Rishima. Which is what's the Nekudas HaRishima? The inner makom, there should be a place. In other words, makom hachalal. That's the root of all of the kalim. But the actual bringing about of the kalim, bepoil, that's through the or. You can't have the kalim coming about only through heder, through the union of tzimtzum. So the tzimtzum does two things: it reveals shorish adin, and then together with the or, that's what makes the kli. V'akavu me'or and social tzimtzum, the kav. The shorish of the kav is an Or Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum, who shorish oirish, and that the kav is the shorish of all the oiris, and the rishim was the shorish of all the kalim. Rina Torah Gamken memutza is Baal Kama, and the Torah is also memutza, as we'll explain later on. And we said there's two aspects in the Torah: the Pnimis of Torah, which is the Or Ein Sof, and the Chitonis of Torah, which is the Gvul. But there is by Masha Kazav Oita Salma, and this is the meaning of the pasuk Oita Salma. These are the two madrigas. There's Oir and there's Salma in the Torah. And that's why Torah is memutza. The difference between the memutza of Torah and the memutza of Olam Atzilus is that Torah brings mamish atzmus into the metzias of these worlds. Masha Einkain Atzilus is mafsik between Or Ein Sof and the Olamis. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thanks. Oh, okay.